Hello, brave souls who stuck it out. I'm Cindy Gendrick, and I'm a professor of theater at Wake Forest and the director of iPlace. Christina Soriano is one of my very good friends and collaborators, and she, along with our wonderful friend Louis Goldstein, the man of the right hand, who is in the senior orchestra, about 8 years ago started this very important center called iPlace, or the Interdisciplinary Performance and the Liberal Arts Center. And it's founded on the idea that any subject matter that we need or want or just desperately feel that we should talk about together is enhanced by these intimate connections that happen through live performance. So for those of you who were lucky enough to be here yesterday to hear Donovan Livingston and see him perform, we were the ones who commissioned him to write those beautiful poems about time and family. I cannot take any credit for the wonderful performance he gave or for the power of his words, but we were really happy to catalyze that and actually encourage him to write those beautiful words. And we also were responsible for helping fund the senior orchestra that we all got to participate in today. Woohoo! I was telling Christina and Louis that I haven't been in a band or an orchestra since I was 18 years old, and I was so jazzed today. It just brought back all the good memories of being in a music group, and I'm going to look back on that as fondly as all of my childhood stuff. But the main reason I'm here right now is to introduce to you Brooke Davis, Cheyenne Carter, and Dr. Cindy Briggs, who you'll meet in just a second. They have been doing this brilliant work with veterans, telling veteran stories, many of them from as long ago as the Second World War, most of them, I believe, from the Korean and Vietnam Wars, but they'll introduce the actual project to you. Cindy Briggs comes to us from Walden University, where she's been collecting stories of veterans for a long time, and Brooke Davis has a history with a family in the military and came up with this great idea of actually performing those stories and those memories for us. They did 2 sold-out performances of these amazing stories. Brooke brought in actors from Wake Forest and from our surrounding theatrical community, and those actors got to meet the veterans whose stories they were telling and then came to tell them. And they did these 2 great sold-out performances last semester. And Brooke and Cheyenne and Cindy are here to share the project with you and for us to get a chance to meet 2 of the actors. In the process of all of this, of course, the actors and the veterans have just had this amazing transformative experience. And Michael Huey, who's performing one of them, is actually doing another iPlace project, working on the story of a woman who was a French resistance fighter, and you should ask him about this. It is so fascinating, and it should be like a blockbuster movie. It's amazing. But anyway, I know that this work has been moving for everyone involved, and I think you're going to be very moved by it. And I hope that Brooke and Cindy and Cheyenne know how proud we are of them and of the fact that we got to help support what they're doing through the work of iPlace. So please enjoy. But in the meantime, before we actually bring them up on stage, I'd like for everyone to please stand, if you're able, for the presentation by the Wake Forest University ROTC.
Forward, march. Mark time, march. Colors, fall. Right, face. Post, colors. Present, arms. Order, arms. Left, face. Forward, march.
Hi, everybody. Oh, I'm short. I'll do that. Okay. My name is Brooke Davis, and I am so thrilled to be able to be here today to talk to you about this wonderful project that so many terrific people and I have been working on together. I'm a theater person. I grew up in a family of storytellers, particularly my grandfather. I was raised, and we lived across the street from one another. And so after dinner, we would sometimes stroll up and around his office and back down, and he would tell me what he called his war tales. These stories were as rich to me as if I had experienced them myself. Mike McCarsick running through the woods and making fun of my grandfather for how he ran. My grandfather giving a little German girl her first orange. My grandfather was born very poor in Lenoir, North Carolina, and didn't graduate from the 6th grade. And was drafted to World War II, and when he went, it was the first time he'd ever left his county. Didn't know how to use a telephone, and he was thrown into, he spent 2.5 years in Germany. 7 years ago, my grandfather died of Alzheimer's. And right before he died, I went to visit him. I was there about 3 days before he died. And he looked at me, and I know he recognized me. He couldn't put words to it, but I know he recognized me. He and I were very close. And he started telling me stories that I had never heard. They were darker stories than Mike McCarsick and the little German girl with the orange. And I was haunted by the idea that this man had carried these memories and these stories in him for 60 years, and I don't know if anybody ever heard them or not. So fast forward to last summer. Last summer, I was preparing for this academic leave, and I had written all of the stuff that I was going to do. I was going to work on restructuring and publishing some research on this obscure 20th century theater practitioner that was going to end up someplace in some journal, or maybe, if God willing, in some library someplace, and maybe 3 people would read it at some point. And one night, it hit me. One of the things that I love most about theater is the community that it builds. When you're teaching acting classes, students are routinely sharing intimate stories of their lives with total strangers because you build this community, this sense of sharing. I began to wonder if this idea of a safe community and the work in the theater might have helped my grandfather. And so I took this incredibly messy idea and with a lot of enthusiasm, and started to make some phone calls. The first poor soul that returned my call was Dr. Cheyenne Carter, who's standing over there. She kindly and fortunately agreed to have lunch with this total stranger, crazy woman, and introduced me later to Dr. Cindy Briggs, and we all had lunch. And Cindy also, she's going to tell you, I'm sure, she was also profoundly influenced by her grandfather, who was a World War II vet. And her yearning to understand his service motivated her to formally interview veterans as well. When I met her the first time, she had more than 90 recorded veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and they're all housed in the Old Winston Museum downtown. And over one of our lunches, we came up with this plan. We said, what if we gathered a bunch of actors that we really trust? What if Cindy picks about 10 of these stories? We get in touch with these veterans, we get permission from them, and we start applying for grants. And Wonderful iPlace funded our work and provided unwavering support throughout and said, yeah, go do it. So here's how we did what we did. This is the process. The actors met. We all discussed the project. Cindy brought us recordings of the stories after she'd gotten permission from 10 veterans, local veterans. They're all from Winston-Salem or the area around, some from Greensboro. The actors listened to these recordings. Some of them were several hours long, and noted the sections that were dramatically significant or sections that they particularly personally connected to. And then the actors and I sat down and transcribed those sections, and we developed a script. One of the most important aspects of this project, Cindy Gendrick talked about earlier, we all agreed that the actors and the veterans would meet. And so for some of them, they went out to lunch and they talked. For others, they visited in their homes. And after actors had met with veterans, they came back and shared impressions, experiences, stories that they had learned from these people. Dr. Cheyenne Carter, came to talk to the actors about her work with vets, also trauma and how that might affect physicality as well, and it was really useful for our actors to think about it in those kinds of terms. After several more rehearsals, the readings were performed the week after Veterans Day to pretty big crowds. We kind of laugh and say we were scared nobody would show up because you do something like this and nobody would show up, and we didn't have room for everybody at our first performance. The readings were performed. The veterans themselves were there, as many as could comfortably travel. Their families were there. There were people from the arts. There were people from the community who were just interested in what we were doing. There were abundant chuckles and even more tears as we shared these stories. And following the performances, we hosted talkbacks with these veterans and the actors to discuss the relationships that had developed. And as I thought about the beauty of bringing these two kind of disparate groups together to share in this lovely presentation, I kept thinking about, this is graduate school, it's ridiculous, but there's this famous Roman playwright, Terence, from 150 BCE, who used to say, "Nothing that is human is alien." Maya Angelou later kind of took that and said it as well. And as I've been thinking about it recently, I've been thinking about how much my grandfather actually taught me during his life, and how he continues to be such a presence in my storytelling as well, even after he's passed on, and how thankful I am that I am able to be reinvigorated by the power of community and storytelling with these lovely folks. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Cheyenne Carter, who's going to come and talk to you a little bit about her work as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm so glad to get to spend a little bit of time with you guys this afternoon. I am also impressed that you guys have stayed all the way until Friday afternoon, and I'm really excited to be able to share a little bit of my story and how meaningful this work has been to me. A little bit about my story. I've been a mental health professional for 15 years. I currently am an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Counseling here at Wake Forest, and I also have a private practice here in Winston-Salem. My personal story, though, is that I was a military spouse for 6 years. And in the middle of that whole world and moving every couple of years and befriending other military families and watching some of the unique stressors, some of the struggles, and then seeing some of the unique stressors and struggles in my own marriage, I began to have a deeper understanding of some of the challenges of military life. While we were stationed in Yuma, Arizona, which is not really usually the prime place you want to be stationed as a Marine family. Usually you're going for San Diego, but unfortunately we were stuck in Yuma. I was actually on staff at hospice as one of the bereavement coordinators. And during my work there, I was able to work with some of the veterans who were on service with hospice. And I had a particular gentleman that I met with who had been on service for a while. He was really declining, and the family was particularly concerned about heightened emotionality. There were a lot more tears. He was more restless. He was blind, and his hearing wasn't that good. And so he basically would spend all day long laying on a couch. And he was becoming more and more distressed. And so the nurses and the CRNs came back and were talking about kind of their concerns about him. And so the medical doctors are like, let's put him on more medication. And I thought, well, here's an idea. How about you send me in and let me talk to him a little bit and see if I can actually give him some emotional support, see what's going on. How about we not medicate him? And so I went and I started visiting with him. And what he revealed to me was that he was a veteran. And in the middle of kind of this transition period for him, he was struggling a lot with his history of being in combat, and really particularly about some of the deaths that had occurred, and particularly people that he had killed himself. And so he was a 98-year-old gentleman who was tormented at the end of life about the people that he had killed himself, and really struggling with that spiritual piece of what's going to happen when I die. Will I be held accountable? What is this going to be like? And he was tormented, having nightmares. I mean, it made sense that his emotionality was up. And so I spent about 3-4 weeks going to visit him and letting him tell me his stories. He would tell me all types of details, and I sat and I held space for that. And what we saw was what I expected we would see. He began to integrate that story into his whole life. He began to have more space to explore his spirituality. I just gave him space, and what we saw were symptoms decreased, and he came to more of a place of peace before he passed. And that was really profound for me, especially since I was currently in the military family. And I just had a strong sense that that's not what I wanted for my friends. It's not what I wanted for my friends' spouses who were serving, that they would carry these stories, like Brooke was saying, in secrecy, in shame, and just tucking them away, and then eventually, potentially, them coming back up to really negatively impact that transition at the end of life. And so I knew I wanted to be involved in military mental health, and I spent the next few years doing some of that work with other positions. And then Brooke reached out to me. And I see some veterans in my private practice. I don't do a lot of that work anymore, but it's something I'm massively passionate about. So when I met her, I knew that we had to do this work. And so what I really loved about, and we had several different ideas from the beginning about what potentially we could do, and as the project unfolded and we became more specific about trying to get these stories out, what really stood out to me about the mental health, and when I think about mental health, I don't think about sickness or pathology, I think about wellness, living well. And so what I love about the idea of storytelling is it's really consistent with Erickson's psychosocial development, lifespan, and how at the end of life, especially they say like the 65 and older, we're doing the ego integration versus despair. And so there's this question about, did my life have meaning? And how do I integrate all of these stories in my life so that I can have a peaceful last season of my life? And I thought this project really nicely helped facilitate that process. I also think about the value of community and storytelling. And there's a huge military-civilian divide. The military individuals tend to complain a lot about it. The civilians don't understand our life. They don't want to know about our stories. And what I found is that a lot of our military service people don't share their stories because they don't think anybody cares. And what this project really, really highlighted is that people do want to hear these stories. And the only way we can kind of build that or bridge that divide is if we have people who are willing to share their stories and people who are willing to listen to their stories. And in that space, we create community, and I think in that space, we create healing. And so this was such a neat project to get to be involved in and to watch Brooke and Cindy just take their passion and run with it. And so I really think as well that there's value to having alternative ways of telling stories. There's a lot of people that need support and healing, and are never going to come to a counseling office, but they'll go to a play. They'll go to a play, they'll have conversations, and so what I love about this is the creativity behind the approach and how, again, I think that we can really reach some people that we wouldn't reach if it was just up to me. So I'm thankful for other people who are in the community who are doing some of this healing work.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again so much for having us. I'm Cindy Briggs. I'm the third of this trio, and God, I love working with these women, and they're really hard acts to follow, so I hope I do y'all justice. So this is my grandfather, and this is me with my grandfather on the beach in North Carolina back when I was about 3. Like Brooke's grandfather, my grandfather John Briggs served in World War II. He was in the 3rd Armored Division. He was all through Europe. He was drafted at age 31, and when I turned 31, I really got what that meant. He wasn't some 18-year-old kid with stars in his eyes. He was a grown man who had a wife and a family and a home and a job and a career and a life. And he was taken away from that for 3 years to serve in this war. Like Brooke's grandfather, my grandfather told these stories about like hijinks and shenanigans and practical jokes and all the amazing people he met. And he never talked about liberating concentration camp or combat. I grew up thinking that being in war sounded like really fun and you were really lucky to get to do it. And also like Brooke's grandfather, my grandfather, he did not have dementia or Alzheimer's, but toward the end of his life, he really started telling darker stories, but not to us. He told it to my distant relatives. He wouldn't tell my father, my mother, or I, or my brother, because he didn't want to burden us. So after my grandmother died, I found all his things, including things like a cigar box full of Third Reich memorabilia and photographs of him dirty-faced and holding a gun and smoking a cigarette, which I never knew him to do. And I felt like I've been handed this mystery that I needed to solve. So this 3 a.m. voice started showing up saying, you need to ask veterans to hear their stories. And by the way, World War II vets are getting old. You need to do it now. So I asked my friend Catherine, who was then the executive director of the New Winston Museum here in town, if she knew any World War II vets who would talk to me. She said, sure, I'll put you in touch with some people. So I met a man who lived at Arbor Acres who introduced me to 2 of his World War II veteran friends. And the day before Thanksgiving in 2013, they had me out for lunch. And they spent 3 hours with me answering all my questions and telling all their stories that they could think of in that span of time. And I walked away and I thought someone needs to record these before they're gone. And I wanted to do it. So I borrowed a recorder and I started. And 4 years later, I have 90 plus interviews with World War II, Vietnam, and Korea era veterans. And this work has changed my life. Like Cheyenne, I'm a trained counselor. I teach counselor education. But this work has been the holiest and most significant thing I've ever done, mostly because it has completely humbled me as a person. And it's reminded me of, I think, values that just get lost in the shuffle of the day-to-day. As Cheyenne mentioned, only about 0.5% of United States citizens have personal military experience right now. A very slim percentage of us actually serve in the military, so we're all very distanced from it. But all of us have been impacted by it. 16 million people served in World War II. All of you are related to somebody who was in that war and was affected by it. And we need to understand these stories because it's not just their story, it's our collective story. If we think about, to get a little bit sort of out there, the warrior archetype, which we don't really talk about very comfortably in the United States. We see it as it's like aggression and violence or it's nothing. But the warrior archetype, every society, every human society has had warriors. How do we honor them? How do we bring them home? How do we help them heal from what they've experienced? How do we acknowledge their sacrifice? And this project to me has been my small contribution to that effort in our culture. I'm going to speak just for a couple more minutes, and I'm going to introduce the actors. But with the theme of Aging Reimagined, the thing I want to tell you on a lighter note is, as I was thinking about this coming in today, I have zero realistic expectations about aging because all of my grandparents lived to be in their 90s, and they all kicked butt until the day they died. And I'm my grandmother was 99, and she was delivering Meals on Wheels. That's my grandmother. So Aging Reimagined, I'm the only way I can reimagine it is to make it worse. And so I want to thank you all for the work that you do. As someone who, I just turned 46 and I'm staring down the barrel of the second half of my life, we can really do this a whole lot better. I think being with these people, I've told my boyfriend 1,000 times if I leave him, it's going to be for a 90-year-old because they are so awesome and just the wisdom and the kindness and the humor and the storytelling. I could do this all day. If I could quit my job and just listen to these guys all day, I'd do it, but I can't. So I'm going to introduce you to 2 of my favorite vets. I'm going to flip this and just make sure I don't go too far. Okay. So I'm going to set this up for you first, and then I'm going to let the actors take the stage, but I'm going to give you a sense of what we're going to do here for the next little bit of time. The first veteran you're going to meet is my friend Sid LeBrun, who lives in Greensboro, North Carolina. Sid has a fascinating story in that his father immigrated to the United States from Paris during World War I because he was basically avoiding conscription. His mother was like, get out, just go to the United States. So he immigrated here as a young man and went right to New York and grew up in the Lower East Side and a Jewish community, and then eventually immigrated to Long Island. And he was a diamond cutter and raised his family on Long Island. Sid's mother immigrated in 1895 from Russia, and she, also Jewish, was fleeing persecution from the Cossacks. So these 2 met, had Sid, who went to fight World War II, and I think that's kind of extraordinary. The second veteran I'm going to introduce you to has a sort of a mirror story. Andre Rocher lives here in Winston-Salem. He is 97. You would never know it. He is the sharpest person I know. And he was a young man growing up in Paris and was on vacation in the south of France when the Germans invaded. And so he never got to go home, and eventually joined the French army. So you're going to hear a slice of his story as well. The way we're going to do it, I'm going to play about a minute and a half of audio from the actual interview. So you're going to hear the veteran's voice telling you just a little bit of their story with their picture, and then the actors are going to come and share a larger chunk of their story as we did it in the stage reading last fall. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce first Sid LeBrun, who's going to be read by Michael Campman, and then Andre Roche will be read by Michael Huey. So here's Sid.
We landed in Swansea, Wales, and as we're walking down the gangplank with a duffel bag and kit, I remember this was my birthday. I was 20, I turned from 19 to 20. I was 20 years old, happy birthday, as I got off the ship. So, we get to France. When I found out we were near Le Havre, and there's the beach. So I'm standing around just waiting for something to happen. And then I was told, go overboard and get in the landing craft. What do you mean, go overboard? You mean, it's a big ship, it's tall as this building. There's cargo nests that you climb over the rail and put your feet in and go down. Oh, that's the only time I've been nervous. I was actually scared. Not nervous, just plain scared. I never saw a cargo net in my life. I didn't even know what they call them. And there's no room to put your toes, especially when the ship leans this way, the rope is tight against the steel, and you can't put your toes in. And you got your pack, your rifle, your gas mask, and all the canteen, the first aid kit, and everything else. I was carrying more than I weighed. I weighed 130 pounds only.
In the infantry, that's me as a buck private. The lowest you can get. My classification is rifleman. You can't get any lower than that. The military operational specification, the MOS, the number, whatever it is, you can't get any lower than that. Now, the combat infantry rifleman is probably the most expendable person in the Army. You just throw them and just say, after a while, it's just too bad they died. It's a shame. They were so brave. And then you forget about them. Anyway, so we're walking. We're spread apart, walking on each side of the road with some space between us, so if anybody hits one, they won't hit all. Now, I expect we did 20 miles a day. It wasn't a forced march. And nobody tells us where we're going. And nobody tells us anything. I mean, even the sergeants didn't know. We ended up in Belgium, probably on the edge of the Ardennes forest, and it was really cold. I mean, getting colder as time wore on. It was said that it was 30 or 40 degrees below zero. It was so cold in the forest, we tried to sleep with pine needles covering us up. It didn't work. We tried to sleep in a group so the body heat would warm us. It didn't work. So I just sat around. I stood around on my feet, just freezing. Just freezing. And I still remember that in the forest. Freezing. And then we had some enemy patrols bothering us, and some were killed, and there were some dead bodies around, and it seems like we're going in a certain direction with some purpose in mind, and we happened to go past the 2nd Armored Division, which were the tanks. And I personally, I was glad to see the tanks. Oh boy, the tanks are nice to have. And then, after a while, we were ordered to get on the tanks. Now, how you get on the tanks, I don't know. But you didn't really know. You just climb up somehow. You're just 20 years old, and you know how to do all this stuff. And the minute we get on, all of a sudden, enemy shells come raining down on us. They're phosphorus shells, the ones that burn. So everybody got off and dispersed, and I didn't see the tanks again until later on when they were parked in the woods, under cover of the woods. And those guys said to us, you need any grenades? You need any rounds for your rifle? Yes, we did. So I personally got 2 grenades. They threw me 2 grenades. And they stripped the machine gun belts and threw the rounds to the guys for the magazines, for the clips. Now, I didn't think anything of it. I mean, you'd do anything for a buddy. But why were these guys so nice to us? Now I know. They knew that we were going to attack by ourselves and not have any cover. In the morning, somewhere around 6 o'clock, we were ordered to attack. Now, after lying down at the edge of the forest, you get up in that snow, heavy snow, right up to your sides, and cold, and go. You start running toward the enemy, toward the town which we were going to attack. It's about 3 or 4 football fields down the road. Just an opening, a farmer's field, because at the tip of the fields, there's a church with a steeple. It's always in the center of town. So we were going to take the town. Well, you can only run so far before you have to rest in that snow. So we hit the ground and just sort of lie there a minute. And I thought to myself, how do you take a town? I mean, what do? You stand on a corner and say, I'm going to take you? I really didn't know. So we run a little bit again, and I'm right in the front of everybody with the lieutenant right behind me, and I was carrying a Signal Corps radio and a handset because I was a messenger when we were in the woods, and at night I would deliver messages to somebody with a password. And so I said to him, I have an idea. What's your idea? Well, what do you say we call the artillery up and have them blast the church steeple, because that's probably an OP of the enemy. That's where they'll be. That's a good idea. So I gave them some coordinates, and I told them to fire 1 smoke shell, and we'll see where it lands, and we'll correct the coordinates. Well, the smoke shell never came. So I began to look up for the smoke shell, and that's when I got hit. And I really didn't know I was hit. I got hit twice in the face and 4 times in the chest. So I put my good hand to the wounds, and I thought I had no cheek. I felt my teeth. And then no pain. I mean, at no time did I have any pain. And I realized I can't use my arm. So I crawled over to the lieutenant and I said, can you bandage me? Because I can't bandage with one hand. And he said, yes. And that's all I remember. And then some time elapsed, and I don't know if it was 1 hour or 2 hours or 2 days. I have no idea, except there was just me in the snow and nobody else. And I decided I better crawl to safety, pushing an inch at a time with the heel, the movement of the heel and the toe. You move about maybe an inch or less. I moved through the snow that way and yelled medic when I had the strength to yell medic, and after a while I couldn't yell anymore. So I figured I'd put my rifle in the ground and put my helmet on it so they could find me. And I realized then I didn't have a rifle. I didn't have a helmet. It was shot off. The chin strap was even broken. So I crawled a little bit more and yelled medic as loud as I could, and somebody in the distance said, "That sounds like one of our guys." And the next thing I knew, 2 guys ran up to me, hit the snow on either side of me, and said, "Can you make a run for it?" And I said, "Yes." And of course I couldn't. I mean, my legs were nothing. I mean, they were absolute putty. So they carried me with the tow dragging through the snow, and nobody shot us. And they got to a low place in the ground, and finally they got a medic, and the medic, he gave me some morphine, and oh God, I was floating. I mean, no pain at all, just fine. And I don't even know what happened next, but I realized I was going to a battalion aid station. And the battalion aid station was one guy with a plasma bag hanging from a branch giving me plasma. And he says, finally, "I don't think this plasma is doing you any good because you're losing it faster than we're giving it to you." Well, with that remark, I don't know what happened next, but I was in, obviously, a field hospital, which was a school. And I heard something funny. And I opened one eye, and I seen the chaplain. He's giving me the last rites. So I says, "You got the wrong church, but the right pew, perhaps." And he laughed, and he said something, and then a nurse came running over, and she tapped my good shoulder, and she said, "Soldier, I'm glad you made it." And after the war, months or years after, I found out a little bit, some more about the attack. Our captain, the commanding officer of our company, he refused to give us the order to attack because he knew we'd be murdered. The battalion colonel, the officer in charge of the battalion, said they'd court-martial the captain right then, right there, right here and now. So he gave the order to attack. The company generally has 150 men. 16 were left. And I was one of the 16. I'm so thankful for the 2 boys that ran to me in the snow, the medics, the doctors, and the nurses were so kind and so competent, and to do all the things that they did with so many people needing their attention. No, I want to make it clear that I'm indebted to all those people. They contributed to getting me better.
Well, I was born in Paris in February 7th. That's good?
It's good.
Some?
Yep.
1921, a lot of time. And when came the war, that's, I think, the part that interests you, I was in Bordeaux, in the south of France. And Bordeaux was in the area that was occupied by the German forces. So I spent some years over there, and it was not a picnic, I can't say, because the German occupation was very hard. We have, for instance, a curfew. We had to be at home at 7 o'clock in the night or 9 o'clock in the night. And I was in what you could call here high school at this time. No, college, because I finished high school just a moment of the war. I was in college, and when the American forces invaded North Africa, I saw the possibility to escape.
because escape from France to Great Britain was very, very complicated, practically impossible. But with the Americans in North Africa and the reconstitution of the Free French forces in North Africa, I saw the possibility to go there and participate. So I escaped from France. I contacted some people of the resistance. I had a means to cross the border, the Pyrenees, the mountains between France and Spain. At the border, I was arrested by the German police, but I escaped. When I came to a city in the south by the name of Bayonne, I had an address. So I went to see the person at this address, and they put me in a truck, and we went to the mountain. In the mountain, I passed one night in a house where I suppose a lot of people passed through. Another person drove me in an old car, very close to the border. And the border was near this little river, and I had to cross it. And I crossed the river with the water up to my mouth in February. It was icy, but I could cross the river. When I came to the other side, about 300 or 400 meters after that, there was a Spanish Guardia Civil, and they put me in prison. I spent 3 months in jail in Spain. We had a cell that was about 20 feet by 6, and there were 11 people inside, all French, escaping. So many people that by night we couldn't lay down. One or two of us had to sit on the toilet, for instance. I spent 3 months in, and I lost 20 pounds. But one day, a warden came, and he said, Rocher? Yeah? And they put me with others on a train, and we went to the border with Portugal. We went to a port city south of Lisbon, and they put us in a ship, and we reached Casablanca in Morocco. In Casablanca, I enlisted immediately, which was my purpose. After 2 weeks, I received a notification that, as I was a student, they sent me to the military academy. They were in need of officers. The academy was very hard because they had to form officers in 6 months. But after that, they gave me a commission. They made me a second lieutenant. They transferred me to be a replacement for a unit in France of commandos. My unit fought all the way in the valley of the Rhone. It was not very hard fighting because at this moment, the Germans realized that with the Americans in Normandy and the American and French forces in the south, they were in danger of being cut off, so they were retreating pretty fast. But when we reached in October the mountains of the Vosges between France and Alsace, very close to Germany, there the German resistance was very hard, and we began to fight very, very hard. It was in October, and it was very cold and raining. We fought all the winter. In April 1945, we entered into Germany, and there I was wounded in both legs. But a few months before, in February 1945, we were fighting in Alsace. One day, we had to fight to take a village near Jurenetzen. There was a foot of snow. And in the afternoon, we received the order to go help another unit because there was an attack from the Germans. And we went there, we fought all the night. It was very cold, and the fighting was very hard. And in the morning, when the sun came out, we received the order to rest our men. And the village was completely in ruins. But there was a corner of a house with part of the second floor. And in this part, under the floor, there was no snow, and there was a piano, an upright piano. And there I met 3 of my comrades, and one of them said, "Oh, I can play piano." So he played. and he played a piano sonata of Mozart. Bum, 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 ba-da-bum, bum, bum. And this elegant music in the midst of the fight, the fires, smoke, corpse everywhere, it was a fantastic contrast. We stayed hearing this music. It was an impression absolutely otherworldly. And after that, we began again fighting. And incidentally, one of those three comrades, not the pianist, another one, was killed 1 hour after that. And every time I hear this, bum, 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 ba-da-bum, I am there.
You get why this is such riveting work. Thank you guys so much. I've heard these stories 1,000 times, and I'm over here just welling up. To begin to wrap up, I want to introduce you. Let's see if my fancy PowerPoint skills are going to play out here. Well, first, a couple points of thanks. We want to thank iPlace so much for believing in us. Thank you. The most important thing you didn't mention, I do work for Walden. I'm a Wake Forest grad, though. I got my master's here, so I have the connection. We want to thank the New Winston Museum here in town for housing all these stories, for trusting me with a recorder. That was a huge mistake. They didn't see it for 2 years, and they're like, we kind of need it back, so I had to finally buy one. But most importantly, we want to thank our vets who, the level of trust and faith they put in us to tell these stories has been so heartwarming, and really, restores my faith in humanity at a difficult time in our history. So I want to introduce you briefly to our vets. These are the other 8 veterans who we interviewed and had in the stage reading who are not represented here today, but they are every bit as amazing. Those 2 stories are beautiful, and all 10 of them were just absolutely breathtaking. And so we're so honored to get to tell these stories. I don't want to show you because these are some of our favorite moments. This is Sid and Michael Campman. There's Sid today, my pal. We have Andre and Michael Huey. Yeah. These relationships are like the best part of this whole thing, is watching these guys become friends. This is a veteran, Bill Eberly, with Brooke and Michael's son, Ian. Bill was in the Navy during World War II, and he and Ian have just a lovely relationship and friendship. This is actress Cindy Graham with Marianne Tuttle. Marianne served in Germany during Vietnam and just loved being in the Army so much. She was a journalist, and just it changed her life. And this is the last one we have a picture of, but all the veterans and actors did get a chance to meet. This is Ron Linville, who was in the Riverines, a part of the Navy in Vietnam in the early 1970s, and just an extraordinary human being, and Philip Kaiser, who did his story. I think that's the end of the PowerPoint magic. So we want to give you all a chance. We have just a few minutes left, but if you all have questions for us, we're all 5 here. What can we tell you about our project? I'm going to let you take that.
Oh, we're in the process. We were in Fayetteville, North Carolina on, what's today? Friday. We were there Wednesday. We are talking to some folks in Fayetteville about this troupe of actors going down and doing some fresh interviews with those folks. We're looking to be performing again in November on Veterans Day weekend. So we're excited about that.
Opportunity to thank you. I've had relatives in military force, Navy. The guy in that picture looked like Grandpa, and my uncles, and Air Force. So thanks for helping me heal.
Other questions? Yeah, that's a great question. So this is the New Winston Museum. You all have heard of the Old Salem Museum. The New Winston Museum was founded about 5 years ago as an effort to gather the oral histories of ordinary Winston-Salemites, so not just the Moravian history. They have a temporary housing right now. They don't actually have exhibit space, and they're currently building their oral history collection, and we're putting it up online, which is kind of the work we're knees deep in right now, is getting all of those stories up on the internet. They're going to be in a oral history data synthesizer that will be searchable in the Library of Congress. So these stories will be available for everyone for all time, which makes me very happy. However, it's in process. So right now, if you went to the New Winston Museum, you couldn't find them, but we're hoping in the next year or so we're going to have everything available. We're doing a podcast. The person who is actually doing that is not here, so he can speak more intelligently about this. But we're putting together a podcast series. We've recorded all of the stage readings, and we're going to have that available too online. So instead of like a 3-hour interview, you get like a 10-minute snippet, which is a little bit more digestible. The other thing that we were kind of talking amongst ourselves, our stage reading is available. If you're on Facebook, you can go to I Was There, a stage reading of Veteran Stories, and watch the video. We did have it filmed. We can get that to you as well. So we can have that available if you'd like to see the whole thing. Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. My qualification for asking the question is I'm a double deacon. I've interviewed 23 people at my church, veterans, and I've recorded their stories. I have not published them, but I would like to do that. But one of the features was I found out in talking to these people, the children asked the father questions about the war. He would not talk about that, and the reason. Then the wife said to the children, "Do not ask those questions. He'll tell you if he wants to tell you, but do not ask the question." Because he's, all night long, he's kicking and turning and fussing. Now, when you ask the veteran, did you ever tell those stories to your children? What they said was, they never asked. So.
It's very circular, and I think I've heard that story from so many people where it's very painful for a veteran to tell, so the kids are told not to ask, and then the veteran thinks no one wants to hear about it. I think Cheyenne talked about that. In my experience as an oral historian, I think a lot of veterans are more comfortable talking to someone like me who they don't know. It feels different. It feels less scary. Okay. She's agreeing with me, so we'll just leave it at that. But thank you for sharing that. I do think it's a good reminder. There are ways to ask that aren't invasive. To sit quietly with someone, I find going through pictures is a great way to open a door. So just get out the pictures and where were you here? What was going on? And that opens that door, and they can share as much as they're comfortable.
Are there any thoughts of expanding this further? Part of what my mind is thinking is I wonder if this could potentially be a catalyst for dealing with veterans with PTSD, possibly introducing it earlier when they're still active military or whatever. I don't know. I would think there would be endless possibilities.
We took a long drive to Fayetteville and talked about 1 million possibilities, and we sit at lunch and talk about 1 million possibilities. Thank you for that. Yes, we've talked about seeing how this goes in Fayetteville, and kind of taking a baby step out of our comfort zone here in Winston-Salem, and then where we go from here. So thank you for that.
I think something that's interesting is in some of my work with PTSD and in working in collaboration with other clinicians who work with PTSD, one of the thoughts around why we're seeing some of the reactions we are in current day combat and kind of kind of current service members that are transitioning is that back in other eras, there was this time period after war where they were even being transported back to America. There were long boat rides. There was this time to tell stories, to decompress with one another. And I know when my ex-husband came back from Afghanistan after his first combat tour, you know, he was in Afghanistan and back to California in like a day and a half. And so there was this like time span that was really different where you went from, you know, this whole other world. And so like that time of integration wasn't there as much. And so there was, you know, at least in this one, another clinician I was talking to, there was just kind of talking about the importance of making space for some of these conversations to happen and how that may be helpful in kind of helping the PTSD not to develop.
Is this on? Yes. Oh. Yes. I was wondering if you were interested in diaries. My father was had a plane in World War II and 7 men. He was the captain, and they were shot down. I never knew it. But anyway, had to get his men out of Germany, and now my brother has the diary that his bombardier wrote. But yeah, my father, when this all came to light, had a stroke and couldn't talk. So we did some talking with him, but you know, he couldn't share it. I actually went to one of his reunions. He told me about it, and my husband and I went. So I have that, and I recorded things, but my dad was not talking at all during that reunion. But the fellows around him were sharing some things, you know. But I do have this diary. Are you interested in things like that?
Personally, I'm interested in everything. So I'm always like, yeah. From the museum perspective, they only do like oral histories. They always say we're stories, not stuff. So I think what I would say to you is find a way to preserve that.
Yeah. Oh, it's
seriously.
preserved.
I've got Civil War letters from one of my great uncles who served in the Confederacy, and I mean, we have it in his handwriting, but we've also typed it out, so we have copies of that. I mean, these things are historic relics. We have to maintain them. So I'm so glad you have that, and I hope you will find a way to preserve that.
Well, yeah, it's not an oral, but it's a written. And actually, his bombardier went into a concentration camp, liberated a concentration camp. So if you ever become interested in, you know, let me know.
Thank you so much. I know our time's about up. One last question, or are we good? Is that covered? Okay, thank y'all so much.
Really glad this could be part of the symposium. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I think that was a great way to end. If everyone could, let's give us, everyone knows Stephanie and Heather, let's give her a round of applause.
Without your help, this wouldn't have happened. We love you and we thank you very much. And Mia, you too. You're probably taking pictures somewhere. Oh, she left for Chicago. Okay. This concludes Aging Reimagined. Go reimagine your aging out in the world. Seriously, though, we'd love to hear from you. So in addition to the surveys, if you have any thoughts, you can email any of us. Our contact info is on the website at Wake Forest. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.